Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're excited to have one of our development consultants with us, Ross Bottorff. He's going to be presenting on using automation APIs in Business Central. We're going to be doing a deep dive in that. And as a reminder, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And we encourage you to ask questions during the presentation, so please feel free to type them in the questions box, and we will get them answered at the end of our session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ross to kick off our presentation.
Hello, I'm Ross Bottorff, and I've been a development consultant for a while now. I've been an actual nav developer, Dynamics NAV, Business Central developer since 2005. And actually started doing C# development because I needed to assist with integrating to Navision at the time. So I've been keeping my eyes on changes to integration with Dynamics NAV and Business Central. So when things pop up with changes like regarding authentication, I want to learn about it, so I'm able to help customers who have any questions on it. So today we will be looking at connecting to an automation API with OAuth 2.0, and this is for the cloud. If you're still on premise and you're using Business Central, then you would still use basic authentication. So we're going to be looking at how to connect to a Business Central cloud environment using OAuth 2.0. And our first step is going to be creating our app registration. Now, I don't know at the customer level who has access to your Azure Active Directory. So this is something that your partners can do. I'll walk through it. So in case you have someone who has access to your Azure Active Directory who's able to set this up, you can have them do it. Otherwise, we can help you out at the partner level. But at least you'll see what's going on behind the scenes regarding creating these app registrations. Okay, let's talk about a little bit first before I actually go into the demo. There is documentation. I recommend that you read through the documentation. It's going to cover things that I'm not, more than likely. But we'll still do the deep dive. I'll be creating the app registration, and I'll be connecting with Postman, so you're able to see what happens on the Postman side, and I'll also be connecting with a console app. And it's actually not that bad to create your app registration. Okay, you go into your Azure Active Directory, you just basically go to your new registration button, and you go through that wizard. It's a small wizard, and you create your app registration. At the end of it, you will want to add some redirect URIs, and I have the most important ones finished pictured here, because I'll be using Postman Online, and I'll need that first redirect URI, and I'm using HTTP localhost for my console app, so I have those two listed here. And this next slide is just to let you know all the app permissions that I've assigned the app registration. So the walkthrough in the Microsoft documentation only has you add a couple. I have you add more because you might be running some example apps that need more authentication. For instance, Microsoft Graph. It's a good idea to to get that downloaded and get a sample app running, so you can test your Business Central registration. Because your client, this app registration can be used for more than just Business Central. It's giving access to various clients into your Azure Active Directory. So you can use it for Microsoft Graph. It doesn't have to be Business Central only. And the Microsoft Graph it's a good troubleshooting tool if you're having authentication problems to your client registration. All right. And the second step to this app registration is setting it up in Business Central. So you actually open up your Business Central cloud version and you go to Azure Active Directory and you type that in your search, and you bring up a list of Azure Active Directory entries, and you create a new one. You enter in the client ID from your app registration, and you give it permissions. Most importantly is don't forget your permissions, because this is what will give your client app registration permission into Business Central. Okay. Now we will be focusing on a rapid start automation API for today. It's really a sample. There are other automation APIs. There's automation APIs to create a company, to publish extensions. We'll be looking at the rapid start. I think it's a good intro API into automation variables. It also has an example of how to upload a document. If you're ever working in an entity that needs some type of file upload. We can also cover the bound actions that you'll see from time to time with the APIs. Those are the methods that you can call aside from just patching and modifying records or inserting records. There might be something on the API that will work as a function that you can call. So it's a good example of that. All right, there are basically 4 URLs that you'll be using. There's the insert of the rapid start package. It's in Business Central. It's called a configuration package. So it's just like if you were to go to the rapid start area of Business Central, go to your search, type in configuration packages, and you create a new configuration package as a user. That's what we're doing, except we're just doing it through the API. And here we have our sample URL for our API call. It's got your base API, which is your base URL, which is your api.businesscentral.dynamics.com, version 2.0. Then it asks for your environment name, and this is where you would type something like production. If you're looking at your environment names, you might have a production, whatever you've created your environment names with. Usually production and sandbox. Some people have a sandbox dev, some people have a sandbox test, but that's where you enter that. We'll be using an environment today called production. So my URLs will have version 2.0 /production /API Microsoft automation. And the companies is looking for a company ID, and I'll cover that. That is the GUID for the company that you want to connect to. For instance, if it's Cronus USA Incorporated, there is a GUID for that. There's an ID, and that's what we'll be entering into this URL for the company ID. And then we end our API call with the actual entity that we're writing to, which is configuration packages. I've got some sample information here of what headers you'll need. And it's pretty basic. You need an authorization header with a bearer as a value, space. It's important to have your space, and the actual token that I'll show you how to retrieve. That will be the OAuth 2.0 token. And content type application JSON you'll need for this post. And really the only thing you need for this is your code. That's going to be the primary key once it gets written to Business Central. And it doesn't have to be, of course, type your package code. It's whatever you want to name it. I use Inovia test in my example. All right. So after we insert our new configuration package, we have to upload the file. It's going to be a rapid start file that somebody has downloaded from Business Central. For instance, in the future, there's a chance that we'll be looking at a lot of Docker images for various versions for our custom code for various customers, and it would be nice to have sample data from the SaaS environments, just basic setup data, something to work with other than Cronus data. But in any case, what someone can do is go to SaaS, your Business Central SaaS environment, and export a configuration package as a rapid start file. And then what we'll be doing with our API is then importing that rapid start file into another environment. Okay. And this patch, again, this is to upload our file. And the header is going to be, again, authorization, bearer, token, content type this time will be application octet stream. And you'll need an if match. And it didn't come through on my PowerPoint here, but that's a wildcard character. It's supposed to be a wildcard character in your if match. And I'll show you that more when we get to Postman. The JSON body is going to be the actual bytes of your file. Okay. Now, there is another method here. We're going to be using another post to that API, our configuration package API. And you'll notice that when you see a reference like your config package ID, that's the GUID. That's the ID for the configuration package that you've created in the previous steps. So you've when you created your first insert of that config package, there's an ID that gets sent back, and that's going to be used here in these other URLs. And you'll notice the bound action here at the end, Microsoft.nav.import. That's what's actually going to tell Business Central that you are going to import that file that you've already uploaded. Notice that they are case sensitive. If for some reason you type an capital I, then you might not see it, and you might not know that, or figure out why it's not working. So just keep track of that. They're case sensitive. The next one will be apply. So this will be the same URL, except it will have Microsoft.nav.apply at the end of it. And again, the header is bearer token for your authorization, and no JSON body for this call or the last call. It's just, you're just firing off those bound actions. Okay. And there is a delete method that you can use with your APIs. If the API does supply it, and this one does, you can delete your config package at the end if you no longer need it, or you can delete it at the beginning if it already exists. And in any case, we'll be going over the delete method as well. Okay. So the PowerPoint is just a summary of what we have on our blog. So this more information is a link to our blog, the Innovia blog, and you'll see more information there, more in-depth detail of what I'll be covering today, authenticating using OAuth 2.0 to automation APIs. All right, and let's go ahead and start our demo. Okay, so here I am in Azure Active Directory. So this is a link supplied to me from our system admin. If you're a partner, you can get to this from the customer. If you're adding one for a customer, you can go to your customer list where you can look at your service registration, your user licenses. There is an option to click on Azure Active Directory there. And I'm going to click on new registration. I'm going to leave it the defaults, accounts in this organization directory only. And I'm just going to click on register. If you've done this in the past, you'll notice that you used to be able to enter in a web redirect URL right away. They've changed that. So you just first have to register. Okay. So note this is our application client ID. This is what you use. I'll just go ahead and put that as a notepad. We need it later. All right. This application client ID is what you'll be entering into your Postman when it asks you for a client ID, your app registration in Azure Active Directory when it's asking for your client ID, and any console apps, integration apps that are asking for the client ID. This is what you'll want to supply that. Okay. And I'm going to enter in 2 redirect URIs. I'm going to add a platform. It's going to be web. Come on. Gonna add another one. And that's going to be that Postman URL. So I've got the 2 redirect URIs that I'll be using. And if you have, if you're using Postman desktop client, you can just use HTTP localhost there, whatever you need to enter for your callback URI. Now I'm going to go to my certificates and secrets. I'm going to create a new client secret. I'll just keep the default description. I'm going to click on add. This will be the only time that I can grab this value. So when I exit out of here, that will no longer be visible. So if I need to use this in Postman or my C# application, I need to grab it now, or I'll just have to create a new one. API permissions. Microsoft Graph is already added here. I'm going to add another one. You'll notice there's delegated permissions and application permissions. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go all the way down to user. So this is an application permission, and I'm going to do user read all. Now, if you were an admin, you can go ahead and grant access. So let's say you're not an admin, you can go ahead and create these permissions, but things aren't going to work until someone actually grants access. So I'm going to go ahead and grant admin consent for what I just added. Okay, let's add more permissions. I'm going to add my Business Central now. I'm going to add some delegated permissions. I just added the 2 that show up when I click on delegated. I'm going to do the application permissions. And you'll notice not granted for Novia. So I'm going to grant the admin consent. And that is setting up your app registration. So the we've got our client secret, we've got our client ID, and now we can use those to connect with, to grab our tokens and authenticate to Business Central. All right, now I already have some created for our demo today, so we can just go right into authenticating. I will go ahead and show you how to find that Azure Active Directory. And that's it. Azure Active Directory applications. It's got my list. If I want to create a new one, I can go ahead and do so. Grab my client ID. And you add your permissions. And you only have to add what this client needs to do. If it's a backup, automation, if it's a rapid start, whatever it needs to perform its task. And you don't have to add anything more. You cannot add super user. They won't allow you to do that. Okay. So those are our setups for our app registration. And the next step is really to start using the APIs. So we have, I can't cover how to do everything in Postman that a new user to Postman will want to know in the demo today, but just know that you can create a group of API calls, and the parent group can have its authorization set. You don't have to set the authorization for each individual API call unless you want them to be different. You'll notice that if you click on these different API calls, you can do inherit auth from parent, or you can change it to whatever it needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and keep it inherit auth from parent, so I don't have to keep on generating new tokens for all my APIs. I'm just going to do it at the parent level here. And so I've set up my authorization to be OAuth 2.0, and there's all these other types. OAuth 2.0 is what we're focusing on. Add auth data to request headers, and header prefix bearer. So you're going to keep that to be the default bearer. You'll notice that there's no space after this. That's because Postman will put that in there for you. Previous versions didn't, so I don't know what version you'll be working in. Some of your Postman versions will have a space there. Know that it's needed in the actual header. And so if it does have a space there by default, you don't want to remove it, because then you'll start authenticating and getting errors, and you might not know that the space is missing. So anyway, just be aware that the actual value being passed in the header is bare space token. The grant type is going to be authorization code. And again, you can get this from the Microsoft documentation. That's where I started. And the callback URL has to be, I can't change this. This is the online version of Postman, so it has to be this redirect URL. And that's why I had to add it to my app registration. Okay, the auth URL I will go over. This is a global variable that I have set up in Postman. You can set up global variables and you can have them used. And this is your syntax for calling them. Bracket, global variable name. The client ID is from my app registration client ID. The client secret is the secret that I grabbed after I created it. I'm going to go ahead and let me show you a better sample of that. The OAuth URLs. So the authorization URL. You can get that from the Microsoft documentation, and you'll notice that it's looking for a tenant ID. And that is the GUID that is in your URL string when you can connect to your Business Central environment. So I'll show you that I'll show you what it is in my demo environment. And you'll be entering the GUID here for your tenant ID. Of course, you won't need the brackets. You just need the tenant ID. This is why you'll see some URLs in Microsoft documentation that don't have the tenant ID included in the actual API call. That's because we are authenticating with OAuth 2.0, and the token will know what your tenant is. So you can have an API call that just has your environment name, but no tenant. At that point, if using OAuth 2.0, it's that tenant ID in your API call is actually optional because the token already knows what it is. Okay, there's an access token URL as well, and you would just look at the Microsoft documentation. This is also in our blog as well. This is what you enter in as your authorization, or I'm sorry, your access token URL for Postman. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back to Postman. So we've got our auth URL that includes our tenant ID, and our access token URL includes our tenant ID, client ID, and secret. Scope here is, you just leave it blank. You just let Postman default to blank. State is just blank. And the client authentication, send client credentials in body. Okay. Let me show you that tenant ID. It is this. It is your GUID to connect to your environment. So we've got our base URL for the actual web client, not for our APIs. And then we have our tenant ID, and then we have the environment name. Okay. So I'm going to grab my new access token. And it didn't ask me to log in. It's because I have recently already entered my information. The Postman doesn't use service-to-service authentication. Postman requires someone to log in to their Office 365. The C# console app that I'll be showing you doesn't need user intervention. It's using the actual service-to-service authentication and grabbing a token without user intervention. So let me use this token. And now that I've updated my token and I'm using it, I can start working with my APIs. So there's an environment API that will list the various environments, and you'll see it here. I'm going to go ahead and call it. And it's going to tell you what environments we have in this tenant for that tenant ID. I've got a sandbox, I've got a production, got a sandbox upgrade test. So today we'll be routing to production. Okay, get companies. This is how you get that company ID. So when I call this API, our API here to production, it's our environment name, using the companies API, I will get a list of companies like Cronus, what other companies have been created for that environment. So in our production environment, we have a Cronus USA Inc. That's what I'll be using. So the ID that I'll be using is this GUID here, and I've actually entered that in as a global variable into Postman. So when I go to my next, or when I go to a URL that needs it, you'll notice that that company ID. This is a global variable in Postman, and I could replace this with the actual GUID if I wanted to. Got a URL here, API to get other automation APIs. This will give a whole list of the automation APIs available to you, this URL right here. So we've got entity definitions, companies, subscriptions, configuration packages, some sub entities here, file, automation companies. These are your automation APIs. So Microsoft separated a specific group of APIs into what they call automation APIs. And originally the OAuth 2.0 Service was only intended to be for automation APIs. It was of last year or a year before when they first announced that they would be deprecating the web services. Not the web service, but the basic authentication in the cloud. And they announced that only automation APIs will be using service, but that's actually been extended to their other APIs. So here's our here's my delete API. You'll notice that it is the config package ID is entered. That one doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to go ahead and grab another one. I'm going to grab the one that's already been loaded. Here's my ID that came back. This is what I enter into my URLs going. So my delete config package. Enter in my config package ID. Send. And no content, status 204 means it's good. This is for a delete. Nothing comes back for delete. Let's create a new one. And you'll notice my header is, there's all these hidden ones, but we're concerned about authorization and content type. Okay, and the body is where I enter in my my code. Create my new config package, grab the ID, and now I can start uploading other files. So enter in my config package ID. I've got a file, I can upload it. Header, content type, octets, application octet stream, bear, authorization, bear space token, body is the bytes for my file. Okay. Status 204, it's okay. No content coming back for this one. I've got the import. Again, replace my config package ID. So I've uploaded my file, but I didn't actually import it to allow it to be used. Perhaps that I messed up the, let's check my headers. I've got if match. Let's actually go back to my upload. There's a chance that I needed to remove that and re-add it. And let's just double check that ID, the BOD, A2. Get back to my import. All right, I needed to re-upload that file. And once I did that, I was able to import. Now, if it's a large file, you have to wait for it to import. It can take a while. This one's small, so I'm going to just go ahead and do the apply now. Oh, I got to change my config package ID. It's the new one that I created. And status 200, okay. So I've applied my file. I'm going to go ahead and call another API, and it's going to be using the same token that the others use, the token that I created before. So it's, even though this is not an automation API, I can still use the same token. So here's my list of customers. I'm going to go ahead and do a find on test. And here's the test customer that I uploaded. So this basically we've exported a customer from another environment with a rapid start file. We've created a new config package in a different environment. We've uploaded a file into that environment, and we've imported it and we applied it, and this is the end result, is we have a new customer in Business Central. And just so you know that there's the other API here, because we're not going to be concentrating on the standard APIs, but here's how you get a list of the standard APIs. And here's my list of standard APIs. Okay. Angie, are you able to hear me better?
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
Okay. Okay. Let me know if you need me to increase my volume. There's a chance that my headset needs to be turned up. Okay. So this is using Postman, and I'm going to switch over to my C# app here. Before that, I do that. Let me go back to my app registration. Okay. Really important here. In your app registration, there is a quick start menu. And you can download various examples for the language that you want to work in. You can go to, I got my sample code from a .NET Core daemon application. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then I'm going to .NET Core. All right, if there were prerequisites, they'd show up here. And it will tell you to make changes if it needs any changes in your app registration. So it's going to check and see if we have the user read all application permission. It's going to check and see if we have a client secret. Even though I created one, I'm going to go ahead and before I download a new one, I'm going to say make these changes for me. This is the list that shows up. I really don't have to add the permission because I already did, but it does want a client secret. The client secret that you enter here will show up in your download. So when it's actually, when you're finished downloading, I'm not going to grab it because I'm not going to be using it. But when you're finished downloading, that secret actually shows up in the code that you've downloaded. And then you download your code sample. So let me get back over to Visual Studio. And so I use that daemon application code sample for Microsoft Graph to grab my sample code. I will be concentrating on specifically what I did for Business Central because Graph is different. You need a different authentication type, but it's just slightly different. And I was able to find some code online on how to connect to Business Central. So let me cover the key points. All right, the access token. That's what we're really trying to do today, demoing. So I have this code set up to get a service token. And so this is the service-to-service token that you're going to need. And most importantly is something called scope. You need to pass this scope. It's an array of scopes. You only need one for Business Central, but you need it. So actually, I had some trouble until I found out what that actual scope was supposed to be. And of course, my base URL. I'll show you what that is quick. No, it's your HTTPS api.businesscentral.dynamics.com. It's what you would find in the Microsoft documentation. Okay, then /.default. That is your scope. That you pass into the actual confidential client application. So we'll be using that to authenticate to Business Central. And it's going to be the confidential client application builder class that we'll be using. Okay. And you pass in the client ID that you got from your app registration. You pass in your client secret. You pass in the authority URL, which you'll see here is just HTTPS, logging up with Microsoft.com, and your tenant ID. So tenant ID would go here where you see bracket 0 bracket. That's where you put your tenant ID. And then your redirect URL. For us today, for this console app, it's the HTTP local host. So use that confidential builder. That's the key here. It's your scope, and it's this confidential client application from your Microsoft Identity Client class, and your confidential client application builder. That's how you grab your token. And the rest of this code here is just acquiring the token, throwing back an error if there's an issue. And the other big chunk of code is, so I've got a delete config package method that I created myself, insert config package, get config package. Those are all just basic API calls. And it's using REST sharp. And these methods are all just basically, and they end up pointing to my main method here that I have in this other class. Now, both this program class and this protected API call helper, they are available online at that URL that I have to the blog. You'll be able to download a PDF that has these two files. And I'm not a C# developer. I do this so I can keep on top of how to authenticate, basically so I can assist people when they call in with support calls and how to how to authenticate for OAuth 2.0. So I've been in, a Business Central developer only since 2012. So these two samples basically is just me throwing stuff together to get you started. It's to come up with a demo and get you started. So we've got our call web API process result async method here. That's what basically everything that I've written in this app points to. And it'll eventually come in here with a web API URL. Those are the URLs that you saw in Postman. They're the URLs that you'll see in PowerPoint. We have those URLs on the blog as well. And everything that I'm doing needs a header, an authorization header of bear space, and then the token. And if it happens to be a patch, I need to put in an if match into my header and with an e tag. And for what we're doing for app start, it just has to be the wildcard. It's the asterisk. You'll see that in the blog as well. All right. If there is a content type needed, I've passed that, and this method will go ahead and add that to my header, the content type. If there is a body that I needed, then I passed it, and I've added that as a parameter. And with the body content, the body, and the parameter type request body. So this request, again, is a REST client. So our client is a REST client. Our request is a REST request. This is using the REST sharp class up above. I'm not using HTTP clients here. I'm using the REST client. And something to point out about Postman is one really nice thing about it is I can go to my collections and go to my code. So I've got code samples here for various languages. So if I go to C#, REST sharp, one of the nice things about using REST sharp in your C# is I can look at my code samples here in Postman and realize what it's actually expecting from me. All right, and that's basically it. I downloaded the Microsoft Graph example. It didn't take much to get that pointed to my client application and make sure that I could authenticate with it. And then I got the sample code that you'll see here for the scope and for our iConfidential client application with the proper class here, the confidential client application builder, to grab your token. And then I'm using the REST sharp to actually do my API calls with those same URLs that you saw in Postman. And just some variable information that I have here regarding those classes. Grab them however you store them, however you want. Properties, app config. But my redirect URL is localhost, API base URL, API businesscentral.dynamics.com. Company ID is that good that I got from my list of companies from that company's API call. And client ID is what the app registration created when I created my new app registration. Client secret is what was created when I created that client secret. Environment name today was production. So whatever your environment name is that you want to connect to, sandbox test, sandbox dev, whatever you named it. And now back to questions.
All right, thank you, Ross. It doesn't appear to be any questions so far, but if anybody has any, please go ahead and get them into the questions box and we can have Ross address them. while we're waiting, Ross, I just want to thank you for presenting and give you a chance to wrap up on your end and say any last-minute words of wisdom to the group.
That's really all I can think of currently for our API calls. Know that, I guess, remember that you can use this code, this type of authentications for service to service for the other API calls. So that was a pleasant surprise for me. I didn't know they were going to extend that. So if you did have integrations that you needed to do between, an external app and your customers, you can authenticate using OAuth 2.0 to allow that service call without needing someone to log in and grab that token. That's all I can think of.
All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you to everyone who joined us today, or if you are watching on demand, thank you for taking the time out to watch this. We do have more upcoming webinars, so visit inovia.com/events. We have a webinar coming up on Thursday this week with one of our partners, Lease Query, and they will be presenting on adopting the new lease accounting standards. So check out our website for more of our upcoming events and to register for the appropriate webinar that fits your role. And we also have training workshops on our website for you and your team members to attend. You can visit our training workshop page at inovia.com/workshops. And again, for more information, to register for the training workshop that fits your role. And don't forget to check out our Inovia Conversation podcast. We have a library of podcasts for you to listen to, and you can find out about all of those on our podcast page, and that's inovia.com/podcast. So browse the selection and subscribe so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. And check out our conference page for our upcoming conferences and what conferences we will be attending and hosting. We have our Inovia Customer Conference May 2022 on our website, so check that out and see if that is something that you would want to come to beautiful South Bend, Indiana to attend at the University of Notre Dame. All right. Well, we thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Inovia webinar. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Ross.
You're welcome. Thank you.